All right, awesome. Well, hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I can't believe we're into week 4 of our Be Calm session already. Time is certainly flying, which means we're getting closer to spring, right? So, always a good thing here for us mid people that get snow. We don't have it right now here in Michigan, at least in mid Michigan, anyhow. So, 50 today with some rain, but we'll take it. The white stuff is going away. So, hopefully, you guys have pleasant weather as well. So, just wanted to check in. Last week, I tasked you with, when we were talking about expectations of ourselves and with others, to think of a situation that was kind of unpleasant. Maybe it made you upset or angry or mad, sad, and just thinking about how you reacted physically and with your words, and then how you were able to change your reaction to a similar situation going forward. So, if you didn't have a chance to do that last week, I would encourage you to do so, just because, we've built up on our weeks here that can really help with our stress management, that can help promote self care too. If we're able just to kind of think about the things that irritate us, the situations, maybe the people, it's just more beneficial for us. We're not spending that negative energy on things that we can't really control when other people are acting and reacting that way. So again, would just encourage you. The PowerPoint is out there if you haven't seen it already, along with the recording, if you wanted to revisit that. So for today, we are talking about communication and boundaries. So we're going to go over what boundaries are, types of communications, communication for better relationships, and then I have a mindful activity for us to finish up with, and then just quickly chatting about next week. So as you guys can imagine, this information isn't brain science by any stretch of the imagination, but it's always good just to revisit what boundaries are, right? And really just kind of simply put, they're a line drawn in the sand, right? They define how we want to be treated by those around us. And, one thing to think about is boundaries really aren't about being controlling. It's really a tool that we can use to establish how we want to be treated. And it's really, they can be essential in having healthy relationships, whether it's a personal relationship with your kids, with a coworker, whatever that looks like with your neighbor. So having those healthy boundaries established, again, can make for less stress for you as well, because everybody kind of knows what to expect, right? You at least know what to expect with your boundaries. And then if you need to kind of go forward and have a conversation if somebody has crossed your boundary line. And so, why are boundaries important besides what I have already mentioned? When we don't have boundaries, typically this can lead to a breakdown in communication with ourselves and those who we interact with, right? But when we do have those in place, our relationships can really flourish. So it helps improve our self esteem and our relationships. So oftentimes, boundaries get a bad rap, if you will, meaning separation or isolation. But in reality, it just really means having that respect, that knowing, and that communication with that person about each other's needs. It helps to make yourself a priority. So, again, when we're able to put ourselves first, in some scenarios, I understand, especially if you have families and things like that, it doesn't happen 24/7. Or if it does, please let me know and you can teach the end of our class today. But typically, for most of us, we prioritize, and I mean, for me specifically, the kids' needs usually will come before mine. If I have time at the end of the day for some self care, I definitely try to do that. And I just think that's kind of the nature of the beast of being a parent or a caregiver, even. But making ourselves that priority, as I gave that analogy a couple of weeks ago, helps to fill our bucket, right? So we're not constantly giving out, we're not constantly depleting our bucket to help us go on with the things that we need to do. Um, so with the boundaries, that also lets folks know the limits, barriers, that imaginary line in the sand where they shouldn't cross. And if they do, then that could be an issue. And again, having that crucial conversation with them. It gives us space to grow as well, boundaries do. So I'm a work in progress. That's what I like to kind of refer to myself as. I know a lot in the health and wellness and well-being world. Practicing 24/7, definitely a work in practice. Same with communication, same with setting boundaries. So it's just again today about the awareness and revisiting certain boundaries in different areas of your life. So it helps us to grow. It gives us that space to grow. It helps with that need for emotional freedom. It helps us to practice self-reflection. And so to grow, we really must live intentionally. And to live intentionally, we need to practice these moments of reflection in our day. So I mentioned before, and we'll talk more about journaling our last week, but reflecting on your day, it's called bookends. So either in the morning or at the end of your day, or both, depending on what your goal is and how much you would like to reflect. Maybe going on a nature walk and reflecting that way. Morning rituals. Maybe you have a ritual or a routine that we talked about a couple of weeks ago for Sunday evenings, getting ready for the week. So, really, just living that intentional moment, being intentional about our habits, being intentional about our self care with these boundary settings can just, again, help with our stress management. And then studying healthy boundaries. So, we want to be direct, right? Being direct doesn't always necessarily equate to being rude or sharp. It's just about being direct. I expect this for X, Y, and Z. Again, practicing that self awareness from when we have those reflection moments, things that maybe you didn't like that happened, maybe with a neighbor, maybe they crossed the line and crossed your boundaries, and you have to have that conversation with them. And then again, self care, really prioritizing that, because the more we're able to prioritize our self care besides filling our bucket, it just gives us that much more time for ourselves, time to reflect, and, really have the energy and the desire and the motivation to move forward with things that maybe might be unpleasant or just regular day to day life type of things. And really, thinking about knowing your limits. What's your bandwidth? My husband, it drives him nuts when I say that in an example like this because it's often referred to IT. But how much do you have on your plate? Because often when we say yes to something, we're usually saying no to something else. And typically that comes back to us. We're saying no to our self care because we have to do X, Y, or Z. Um, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, right? And so boundaries really help to protect you and give you more time to manage yourself and your health. Thinking about what goals that you would like to accomplish in your health and well being within your professional role as a parent, as a caregiver. It gives you that time back to do that. But sometimes with knowing our limits, we can kind of get stuck, especially if we're people pleasers, achievers, really wanting to do good for others. And the key here is really just to be mindful of your feelings, right? We all know what it feels like when somebody's crossed the line. And depending on how far they took it, depends on how deep of a reaction we might feel. And so if you're feeling uneasy or uncomfortable in somebody's presence, if you're feeling overwhelmed or anxious around certain people, oftentimes we can be nervous or stressed in someone's presence because they fail to our honor us, our appreciation, and our boundaries, quite honestly. So learning to say no, I'm getting better at this. I am somewhat of a people pleaser. I like to make people happy, especially my core group, with my kids. They definitely have me stretched in a lot of different directions and mostly in a good way, right? Um, but I always remember this example of I had just had my husband, I just had our first child, and she was almost a year because she's born in January. This was December for the Christmas holiday, and I got into a cookie bake at work. And I was already feeling stretched because I was a first time mom trying to learn the ropes with all of that. I was, back to work full time after 6 weeks and really just trying to juggle that whole scenario. And in my mind, my inner voice was like, don't do it. Don't sign up. You don't have time for this. You don't, but I said, sure, I would love to. And so my husband ended up making those treats or those cookies for me, which I truly appreciated. And he set the boundary that I'm not to sign up for any more cookie bakes after that. So I have honored that. And I joke a little bit, but just to give you a lighter example of things that we, think we might enjoy doing, I thought it was going to be a blast. Well, when it comes down to the end of the day and you're whooped, that was the last thing that I wanted to do. So think of some of those situations in your life. If you do have kids, what are you saying yes to? Are you on the PTSA? Are you your kid's coach? Are you, the driver for carpool? Whatever that looks like. If you're a caregiver for, maybe a parent. I'm in the sandwich generation myself. So, what can you ask for help with? What boundaries can you set so you can protect yourself, right? Because again, we all have those same 24 hours. And then really just kind of knowing what your rights are, right? And hopefully everybody is able to practice these. But again, just as a friendly reminder, I have the right to be treated with love and respect. I have the right to prioritize self-care without feeling guilty. And again, like I said, a work in progress, I do sometimes struggle with that because there's still homework that needs to be done or X, Y, or Z type of a thing. I have the right to say no to others' expectations. Again, we don't have to be rude or brass about it. We can have those adult conversations and be pleasant and still have, a positive outcome with that. I have the right to feel detached from someone's heavy emotional lifting. And, you probably somebody popped into your mind about that, whether again, professionally or personally. We have that right to kind of distance ourselves because, as I mentioned before, behavior is contagious, whether it's positive or negative, and other people's actions and emotions can bring us down. I have the right to be unavailable, yet being authentic. I have the right to accept my mistakes and keep learning. I'm typically hard on myself. I don't know if you guys are in the same kind of a boat. If I don't learn something right away that I feel like I should, if I did make a mistake, I tend to get kind of hard on myself, feel down for a little bit, and I'm working on that too. So again, that's just part of life. And you just got to take a point and move along, as my gramps would say when we were playing euchre. And then I have the right to find my joy even when no one quite understands it, right? So there are feelings, our emotions, they belong to us. Other people, it's nice when other people do understand where we're coming from, but it's not necessary, right? And so moving into the communication piece, as you can see here, there's a lot of different communication types. There's the perfectionist who wants to be clear, show them how they can fill the expectations. The giver, the helper, they communicate appreciation, steer clear of criticism. The achiever or performer often rewards. They are clear on the definition of success. The romantic value their unique insight, steers clear of comparison. The investigator respects privacy and uses written communication. And you probably, again, are picking and choosing which one of these you kind of fit into. And quite honestly, for different scenarios, I could see myself in each one of these roles because sometimes we do have to put different hats on. We do have to communicate differently. So think about if any of these resonate with you. The loyal guardian, honor their questions, be honest, and give them space to be real. The enthusiasts invite optimism and creativity, make it fun. And these are how this is their communication language, if you will. If you want to talk to a perfectionist, they want you to be clear. They want you to show them what their expectations are and how they can accomplish them. The protective challenge, be respectful and assertive without being controlling. And then the peacemaker, establishing clear priorities, avoiding high conflict in situations. And as you can see on the graph here that kind of makes a star, a lot of these communication types intertwine and kind of go in together, as I was saying with Just depending on the different scenarios that you're in, you may be communicating in a different style, working with different people, knowing the way that they hear your type of communication. And that just makes us better communicators. If we're able to kind of narrow down what type of a communicator our boss is, it's going to make those meetings much more efficient, right? Learning what kind of a communicator our spouse or partner is going to make our relationship that much stronger, better, healthier, because we have that communication language already in store. Now, going about passive communication. So passive involves allowing your own rights to be violated, sometimes by failing to express the honest feeling, thoughts, and beliefs, or by expressing the thoughts and feelings in an apologetic manner that others can easily disregard. The message you communicate might be, I don't count, you can take advantage of me, my thoughts and feelings don't matter, only yours do. So a lot of times when we're around passive communicators, that can be kind of the vibe that we get from them. So as you can see here, other characteristics of passive communicators allows others to make their decisions. They don't stand up for their rights or needs, allowing others to intimidate them, maybe feeling insecure, withdrawal, and withdrawn, and fears conflict. So when we talk about being assertive, and again, I think some situations kind of warrant both types of communication. If I'm in the grocery store and, maybe there's a Karen around, I'm not going to involve myself into that conversation or ride on their coattails of satisfying what they're arguing or kind of being bitter about. So I'm going to be passive because that's not important to me. Things that are important to us, we definitely want to be a little more assertive. So, and being assertive is really based on mutual respect. It's an effective and diplomatic style of communication. And it shows that really you not only respect yourself because you're willing to stand up for your needs and values, and that you're aware of others' rights and willing to work on resolving conflicts. Now, having said that, the way the message is delivered is just as important, right? Again, we don't want to be too aggressive. We want to communicate in a way that is in between passive and aggressive, kind of being neutral with our tone, being passionate, but still not going over that fine line, if you will, that boundary of maybe a louder voice, especially if somebody is more on the passive side. So with assertive communication, it helps us to establish meaningful relationships. It demonstrates self-respect and gains respect from others, typically when we are able to be assertive with our conversations. So I'd like to pause just for a moment and have you think of a situation, and you don't have to share it on the chat, just jot down a note, just literally will take 60 seconds, and think of a scenario of where maybe you were a little more passive with some communication and you wish you would have been a little more assertive, or you were maybe a little too assertive and you would have kind of like to dial it back a little bit. So just go ahead and think of that scenario here for a moment. Okay. So different ways that we can say no, and in the assertive manner, the reflective listening no. An example would be, you really need a volunteer, and while I'd like to help, I have a prior commitment. That's being assertive. Again, we don't have to, have a negative tone to our voice. We're just saying how it is, right? The reasoned no. Thanks anyways, I'm not a baseball fan. The rain check no. Today is really busy for me. How about tomorrow afternoon at 4? The broken record no. No, thank you. I'm not interested. And the flat out no. Sometimes it's most appropriate just to say no and move on. So I like these tips because, again, for some of us, saying no can be a challenge, especially when we feel like we should be doing that task at hand. And of course, work is a different, scenario here, I'm not necessarily talking about work, but thinking again about the commitments and the obligations that you have, are there some of those that you could have maybe said no to some of those scenarios to free up a little bit of time in your day and in your week? And then really just before we speak, thinking about, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Right? Having that filter be to the forefront of our mind, um, you know, having the power of considering the power that we have of our own words and thoughts and feelings, really not thinking about the matter of the topic, whether it's about yourself or something else or something or someone. Just consider letting those words pass through these three gates, before you speak. And then, pardon me, and then a lot of times, we might not even have to engage in that conversation. I've had a couple of email responses over my years at work where it's like, you just, you type it out, and it's like, okay, so let's just pause, let's wait 5 or 10 minutes, calm down, reread it. Is it really worth sending it? Is it really worth opening up that can of worms kind of a thing? Same with the text. Just go into town with a text response, pause. Is it necessary? Is it going to get the point across that you would like to get across? Kind of a thing. So again, just a suggestion there. And so practical ways to communicate for better relationships using iMessages. So instead of you don't ever take care of the dishes in the dishwasher, I would really appreciate it if you could help around the house and help with emptying the dishwasher. So you're taking that blaming you don't kind of behavior to how it makes you feel. So these iMessages can help you get your point across without causing defensiveness. And even if we are angry or frustrated, it's just easier for the other person to hear what we are saying if we frame things in that way. So again, a more generic example would be, I felt this way when you did that, instead of you made me feel. So again, kind of consider, next time you're having a conversation with a loved one, thinking about maybe switching and seeing if that makes a difference from using you statements to I statements. And then consider removing barriers to communication. So body language, right? Verbal and nonverbal language should align to avoid confusion. So if I have a smile on my face, but I'm really laying into somebody, those two don't necessarily, match up too well. Not listening properly, letting people finish talking before we have our input, and avoid jumping to conclusions if you're able to do that. Again, just let the information marinate, kind of give yourself that breath before we respond. Avoid information overload. Sometimes less is more, right? And cultural barriers, consider the norms of communication that can vary between cultures, such as personal space, and try to find that common ground in those situations. And then physiological barriers, maybe impaired eyesight, hearing problems, an illness, or if someone has a, chronic pain or condition, those a lot of times can interfere with effective communication as well. So ideally, we would love to know the person to that depth in which we're talking with. Sometimes we're not, so we really just have to use our best judgment and, be as positive as we can if the situation allows for that. Okay, so to practice some I statements, as you can see here, the top two are examples. So blaming, you can't keep coming home so late. It's so inconsiderate. And the I statement would be, I feel worried when you come home late. I can't sleep well. Blaming statement, you never call or text me. I guess we just won't talk anymore. Again, jumping to conclusions. I statement, I feel hurt when you go so long without calling or texting. I'm afraid you don't care. So I have two scenarios for you to practice an I statement with here. The first scenario is you are working on a group project and one member is not completing their portion, and you must repeatedly finish their work. So think about or write down what an I statement you could use in that scenario. And then the second scenario, a friend or family member cancels plans at the last minute. Recently, you were waiting for them at a restaurant, and when they called to say they couldn't make it. So, what would be your I statement example for that person? So, hopefully, that gave you some ideas on how we can better communicate, how we can set those boundaries, how we can go from you statements to I statements so it doesn't come across as we're blaming somebody else. And so, this week's considerations, I'd really like you just to think about and evaluate how you communicate when you feel frustrated, angry, or sad. Are you using you statements or are you using I statements? And if you have a scenario in mind, go ahead and try with the I statement. And then compare that to how you communicate when you're happy. And kind of just see if you do notice any differences. Are you more passive? Are you in the middle? Are you aggressive? And because sometimes when we're excited, we can be really, loud and boisterous. And it doesn't, again, always have to be a negative thing. But sometimes the volume of our voice can be off-putting as well. So that's the week's considerations for next Wednesday. And we are going to be talking about mindfulness and meditation. Going to have a few hands-on examples for you guys. Going to have a couple of meditations for you to try. So I'm looking forward to that one. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we wrap up this week? Okay, well, you all should have my email. If you have any questions that you think about, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, enjoy your week and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thank you.